Story 1. When I found myself newly single after a 2-year relationship ended, I was back to living alone, adjusting to the quiet, and swiping through Tinder and other dating apps. A few months had passed since the breakup, and I had met a handful of people, though nothing serious. Among those fleeting connections was a woman named Jessica, who I matched with on Tinder. She gave me her Snapchat, but the conversation quickly fizzled into her just watching my stories without saying much. That kind of thing used to happen a lot back when I was in college, but now, in my late 20s, using dating apps felt more draining than fun. It was a constant reminder of how shallow and exhausting online dating could be at this age. I live alone in a cozy corner townhouse in a quiet little community. For work, I am an accountant. The money is solid, but I would not exactly call it thrilling. When my ex moved out, I thought I would enjoy the peace and solitude, but after about a month, the novelty of being alone wore off. I realized that maybe I am the kind of person who thrives on companionship or at least needs people around to feel grounded. That is why I kept swiping on apps, setting up dates, and looking for excuses to leave the house. This all happened last December. One day, I posted a Christmas-themed snap on my story, and guess who slid into the conversation? Jessica. It was the first time we had spoken in weeks. She struck up a chat about doing something festive together, and soon we were tossing around ideas. I suggested classic holiday activities like ice skating or strolling through the local village to admire the decorations, but she surprised me by suggesting we decorate my Christmas tree. Now, I do have a tree, but it is fake and tucked away in the attic. I admitted to her that I had not brought it down yet because it was a bit of a hassle to do on my own. She immediately offered to come over and help, and I figured, why not? We agreed she would swing by around 9 that evening. When we made the plan, it was already dark, probably around 7:30. I remember rushing out to grab my keys and making a quick trip to the liquor store to pick up a couple of bottles of wine. By the time I got back home, I was in full-on cleaning mode. I vacuumed, swept the floors, and tried to make the place look presentable. After my ex moved out, I had come to appreciate just how quickly a place can get messy when no one else is around to keep up with it. 9 o'clock rolled around, and there I was, sitting on the couch, pretending to casually watch a movie while anxiously waiting for her to show up. I had set the room to feel cozy and welcoming, but as the minutes ticked by with no word, I started to wonder if she was going to flake. I sent her a quick follow-up message asking her to let me know when she was on her way. Just as I was about to give up, around 9:30, she messaged to say she was outside. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find myself looking up at her. Jessica was at least 6 feet tall, taller than my 5'10" by a couple of inches. She was wearing what seemed like an entire bottle of perfume, so strong that it almost knocked me back. We headed to the couch, and she sat down unusually close to me, so close that our legs were touching. Right away, I started to feel a bit unsure. She looked older than her photos, with a slightly rougher edge to her appearance that I could not quite put into words. And beneath the heavy scent of perfume, I caught a faint whiff of something unpleasant, like body odor. It was not overpowering, but it was enough to throw me off. I asked her if she wanted some wine, and she eagerly said yes. I poured us each a glass of Merlot, and we toasted to, I guess, the holidays, or maybe just to meeting in person. Have you ever met someone you have been texting for a while and found them to be completely different from what you imagined? That was this situation, exactly. Something about her felt off, like she was missing some basic social cues. As we sipped our wine, I tried to keep the conversation going, but then, out of nowhere, she spilled a giant splash of red wine on my light blue couch. And just like that, the night was starting to feel like a disaster. When the wine splashed across my light blue couch, I had to fight the urge to lose my temper. I forced a smile and told Jessica it was fine, though inside, I wanted to scream. I jumped up and hurried to the kitchen to grab a damp paper towel and a sponge. Returning to the couch, I blotted at the stain as fast as I could, hoping to minimize the damage. Jessica apologized repeatedly, and I kept insisting it was no big deal, even though the tension in the air was growing thicker by the second. To break the awkwardness, I suggested we go ahead and get the Christmas tree out of the attic. Heading up the ladder, I found the large box that contained all the parts of the tree. Piece by piece, I slid them down to her, starting with the smaller sections and working my way to the largest. The final part was the heaviest, and I struggled to maneuver it, but she grabbed it with ease. It was a reminder of how tall and strong she was compared to me. Once we had everything in the living room, we got to work assembling the tree while holiday music played in the background. I poured us both more wine, partly because I needed to relax and partly to keep the evening moving along. Wine has a way of smoothing over uncomfortable moments, and soon, I felt a little looser and more at ease. With the tree fully set up, the next step was decorating it with ornaments. I told her I had bins of ornaments stored in the crawl space, many of which were from my childhood. My parents had passed down loads of Christmas decorations to me over the years. Jessica stayed in the living room while I went to retrieve the bins. As I crouched down in the crawl space, lugging out the first bin, I started to feel strange, dizzy and lightheaded. Now, I am not much of a drinker, and I know my tolerance is low, but this felt unusual. I had not consumed enough wine to feel this out of it. By the time I made it back upstairs with the first bin, Jessica was nowhere to be seen. I assumed she had gone to the bathroom, so I called out her name, but there was no response. I checked the bathroom and the bedrooms, but she was not there. I even pulled out my phone to send her a message on Snapchat, but she never opened it. It slowly dawned on me that she had left without saying anything. I sat down on the couch, utterly confused and starting to question myself. Did I say something wrong? Was I not attractive enough for her? Even though I had not been that into her either, the thought of her sneaking out still stung. The couch, oddly enough, felt more comfortable than usual, and I sank into it, scrolling through my phone and absent-mindedly watching the television until, at some point, everything went black. When I woke up, the room was pitch dark. The TV was off, and no lights were on. I felt disoriented and weak, as though my limbs were weighed down. I reached around and found my phone under me. When I turned the screen on, the bright glow lit up the room just enough for me to see the silhouette of someone tall standing in front of me. For a moment, I froze. My voice caught in my throat as I managed to croak out, "Jessica?" There was no response. My chest tightened, and I put the phone back down, plunging the room into darkness again. After a few seconds, I called out her name once more, my voice shaking. Finally, I reached for my phone again and used the flashlight to illuminate the figure. It was Jessica. She was standing completely still, staring down at me. I felt paralyzed, not just with fear but also from whatever she had slipped into my drink. My body felt like dead weight, and I could barely move. "Jessica?" I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. She did not answer. Instead, she turned toward the stairs and, in an instant, sprinted down them. Her heavy footsteps echoed through the house, followed by a loud slam from somewhere below. I assumed it was the front door. The house felt distorted in those moments, sounds were off, and everything seemed surreal. Each passing minute, my head cleared a little more, and the weakness in my limbs began to fade. But the sense of helplessness and the image of her standing over me lingered, leaving me shaken and unsure of what had just happened. When I finally felt clear-headed enough, I picked up my phone and opened Snapchat. Her account was gone. She had blocked me. I felt a sinking mix of confusion and anger. I walked over to the front window and peeked outside. No cars were parked on the street except for my own and my neighbor's. That was when it hit me, I had no idea what vehicle Jessica had arrived in, or if she even came in one at all. I scoured my house from top to bottom, searching for anything that might have been stolen. At first, nothing seemed to be missing. But then I realized something bizarre. Every single bottle of pills in my house was gone. She had taken everything, my vitamins, my supplements, my prescription bottles of Adderall, and even an old bottle of oxycodone that I had barely touched after a surgery. That one had been tucked away in the drawer next to my bed. She also took a bottle of vodka from the mini fridge in my bedroom. Oddly, aside from that, nothing else was missing. No electronics, no cash, not even small valuables. It was like she came in with a singular focus. Still, I immediately called the police to report the robbery. When the officers arrived, I explained the situation as best as I could. I told them the only name I had for her was Jessica, and the only contact information I had was her now-deleted Snapchat account. They asked a few questions and then knocked on my neighbor's door, even though it was close to 1 a.m. I stood beside them as they asked my neighbor if he had seen or heard anything unusual that night. He shook his head, bleary-eyed, and said he had been asleep the entire time. After about 20 minutes, the officers left, saying there was not much they could do with the limited information I had provided. Once they were gone, I double-checked all my keys to make sure they were accounted for, just to ensure she could not come back. Then I locked up the house and sat in silence, trying to piece together what had just happened. Jessica, or whoever she really was, had vanished without a trace. Looking back, her behavior made so much sense in hindsight. From the moment she walked in, there had been something off about her. She seemed older than she claimed, and now I am convinced she might have been homeless and battling a serious drug addiction. The overwhelming cloud of perfume she wore, it was not just excessive, it was likely an attempt to cover up body odor, which, to be honest, still seeped through. As I thought more about it, I realized she must have spiked my wine while I was up in the attic. Whatever she used knocked me out just long enough for her to search my house for anything she could find, anything that would feed her addiction. I still cannot shake the memory of waking up to her silhouette standing over me, tall and motionless, in the dark. That image is burned into my mind. After that night, I could not bring myself to finish decorating the Christmas tree. In fact, I left it untouched for the rest of the holiday season. The whole experience was too unsettling, and the idea of celebrating anything just felt wrong. Instead, I spent the rest of December trying to forget the whole ordeal, though I doubt I ever truly will. Story 2. This happened on Christmas Eve back in 1997 when I was 7 years old. Since my family is Jewish, we do not celebrate Christmas, so the night was like any other for us. My dad, Michael, is a doctor, and because he is Jewish, he usually works on call during the Christmas holidays. That night was no exception, so he was not home. It was just me and my little sister, Emily, by ourselves while he worked. Technically, our mom, Susan, was home, but to be honest, she had a drinking problem. At the time, I was too young to understand what alcoholism was. All I knew was that by the time it got dark, my mom would usually be passed out, and trying to wake her was next to impossible. I know it sounds harsh, but it is important to the story. Emily and I were downstairs watching television when we suddenly heard a knock at the front door. Being the older sibling, I went to see who it was. Our front door had small glass panes, so it was easy to see who was on the other side. Standing there was a man dressed in a Santa Claus suit, holding a large bag. When he saw me, he smiled and waved, motioning for me to come to the door. I walked closer but did not open it. I thought it was strange for someone dressed as Santa to show up at our house, especially since we were Jewish. The man said, "Hey, kid. It's me, Santa. Let me in, and I'll give you your presents." I remember looking at him and saying point-blank, "Santa is not real. And even if he was, he does not give presents to Jewish kids." The man chuckled and said, "Of course I am real. In the past, I only visited Christian homes, but lately, I felt bad that Jewish kids never got presents. So this year, I decided to change the rules just for you." I was not buying it. In fact, I got upset and started arguing with him. I told him that Jewish kids do get presents, just during Hanukkah instead of Christmas. That is when his smile faded, and his cheerful act disappeared. His tone turned demanding as he ordered me to open the door. I quickly told Emily to call 911. Hearing this, the man bolted, running away from the porch. We managed to call the police, but the operator did not seem to understand what was happening. Looking back, I think she might have thought we were just two kids getting excited about Santa Claus coming to our house. She dismissed our call, saying the emergency line was for real emergencies only, and hung up. Emily and I were terrified. We did not know who else to call. Being only 4 and 7 years old, the only numbers we knew were our home number and 911. This was the 1990s, so our dad did not have a cell phone, and we did not know the number for the hospital where he worked. And with Mom completely unresponsive, we felt like we were on our own. We hoped the man would not come back, but a few minutes later, he knocked on the door again. This time, he said, "I know the cops are not coming. Let me in, or you are going to regret it." Emily started crying and ran upstairs to try to wake Mom, but I knew that was not going to work. Desperate, I came up with the only plan my 7-year-old brain could think of. I grabbed some candles from our menorah and lit them all. Then I ran under the smoke detector and blew the candles out, creating enough smoke to set off the alarm. Looking back, I realize how dangerous and foolish that was. I could have accidentally started a fire. But at the time, I thought the smoke alarm would automatically call 911 and send help. Luckily, the fire department was only a couple of minutes away, and they arrived quickly. Emily came back downstairs, frightened by the alarm, but I assured her there was no fire and told her to stay inside with me. To our shock, the man did not leave. Instead, he approached the firefighters, claiming to be our dad. He told them he had dressed as Santa to surprise us for Christmas Eve. He explained to the firefighters that his Santa suit didn't have any pockets for his keys, and since the door was locked, he couldn't get inside to save us from the supposed fire. He pleaded with them to break down the door, and to my horror, the firefighters seemed to believe him. They began preparing to force the door open, and one of them told us to stand back. Emily and I started crying, shouting as loudly as we could that this man was not our dad. We told them our dad was working at the hospital, that we didn't even celebrate Christmas, and we had no idea who this stranger was. The firefighter who was about to break down the door paused, looked at us, and asked, "You don't celebrate Christmas?" Through tears, I told him, "No, we're Jewish," and showed him the kippah on my head. I pointed to our menorah nearby and explained how I had set off the smoke alarm on purpose because the police wouldn't believe us, and we needed help. I begged him not to let the man inside. Thankfully, the firefighter believed me. He turned back to the man and asked, "Why would Santa be visiting a Jewish home?" I don't remember exactly what the man said in response, but it was clear the firefighters weren't buying his story anymore. 2 of them tackled the man to the ground and held him there while another radioed the police. One of the firefighters then asked me for the name of the hospital where my dad worked so they could contact him and let him know what was happening. When the police arrived, they arrested the man on the spot. Another officer stayed with Emily and me until my dad came home. Dad was furious, first with our mom for being passed out and essentially leaving us alone during something so terrifying, but mostly relieved and grateful that we were safe. That night was one of the scariest of my life, and for years after, I'd get uneasy whenever anyone knocked on the door unexpectedly. As far as Christmas Eve memories go, I'd take our usual quiet, boring nights over that one any day. To this day, I can't help but think that being Jewish, and the firefighters noticing that detail, saved our lives that night in the Pocono Mountains. Story 3. We found a cozy little Airbnb that was all decked out for Christmas, complete with festive decorations, a charming view, and lots of open space. It was not far from a quaint little village. To top it off, a snowstorm was forecasted for that evening, so we made sure to leave a bit early to grab groceries and settle in before the weather hit. The drive from the city to the Poconos took about 4 hours, and we made good time. On the way, we stopped at a Family Dollar to grab a quick bite and pick up some groceries before heading straight to the Airbnb. The gravel road leading to the house climbed gently uphill, weaving through a break in the trees until we came to the clearing where the house stood. It was surrounded by dense woods, with a wide terrace featuring a hot tub that looked especially inviting. Imagine soaking in it while snowflakes fell around you. The grounds were alive with Christmas cheer, glowing reindeer, a tall snowman, and oversized candy canes lining the path to the front steps. Once we parked, it took a few trips to carry everything inside. The place was every bit as charming as the photos had promised. A Christmas tree sparkled in one corner, stockings hung on the walls, and holiday knickknacks were sprinkled throughout. There was even a comforting woodsy scent in the air, the kind you expect from a rustic log cabin, though this was more of a cozy house. That smell, I realized, came from the stack of logs by the big fireplace in the living room. The house had 3 bedrooms, but we only needed one. The second bedroom became our storage room for luggage and extra stuff. Like always, I did a quick walk-through, checked the fridge, flipped through the TV to see if they had cable or Netflix, and took a peek out of all the windows. There was even an attic upstairs with a pool table and a couple of old couches. The basement, though, was a different story. When I went to check it out, it felt disconnected from the rest of the house. It was big, bigger than I expected for a house this size, but cold and dimly lit. It had more of a utility room vibe than anything cozy, with laundry equipment and some tools lying around. As I climbed back upstairs, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a man who looked to be about 40 stood there. He was dressed casually in gray sweatpants and a beat-up, yellowish-brown jacket. He greeted me with a friendly smile and asked how we were doing. I told him we were fine and asked if he was the host. He explained that he ran the property with his brother. I asked his name, and he said it was Matt. He told me he lived nearby and that if my girlfriend or I needed anything, we could reach out. I thanked him, and as he walked off, I could not help but wonder how he knew I was with my girlfriend. Emily had not come to the door, so maybe his brother, Jake, the person I had arranged everything with, had mentioned it. I remembered telling Jake that it was just the 2 of us and that we were looking forward to a festive getaway. By the time night fell, the snow had started coming down, and the house felt warm and cozy. We turned on the heat and got to work cooking dinner: chicken thighs, broccoli, potatoes, and cornbread, a simple but satisfying meal. We ate on the couch with the Christmas tree glowing warmly in the corner, watching the Polar Express. It was the only decent Christmas movie we could find on streaming, and honestly, it suited the mood perfectly. After dinner, once we had given ourselves time to digest, we decided to try out the hot tub. I turned on all the outdoor Christmas lights, which lit up the yard beautifully. Then we settled into the steaming water, watching the snowflakes drift down in the quiet night. It felt like pure bliss, until the jets in the hot tub stopped, leaving us in silence. That was when we both heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching in the snow somewhere on the property. Emily and I exchanged a look. I asked her if I should call out, but she shook her head. We listened as the footsteps moved farther and farther away, until they disappeared completely into the night. I told Emily that the noise we heard was probably just a deer, but deep down, I knew those were human footsteps. After soaking in the hot tub, we decided to take a quick shower before heading to bed. But the hot water ran out in less than 2 minutes. Something was definitely wrong. When the water turned ice cold, we both screamed and jumped out of the shower in a panic. I messaged Jake, the owner, about the issue. It took him about half an hour to reply. He said it was odd and promised to send a repairman to check the water heater the next day. With no other option, we went to bed after our half-finished showers. But in the middle of the night, we woke up to an aggressive pounding on the front door. The sound was so loud and forceful it made the whole house feel uneasy. Emily shook me awake, her face pale with fear. I said I would go check who it was, but she grabbed my arm and begged me to stay in bed and not make a sound. Honestly, I was relieved she stopped me. The last thing I wanted to do was confront whoever was outside at that hour. The knocking came in 3 bursts, each one more furious than the last, before it finally stopped. We sat in silence, whispering nervously to each other. To feel a little safer, I got up and quietly closed the bedroom door. For what felt like forever, we stayed awake, listening for any signs of movement. Eventually, after about 30 minutes of tension, we both drifted back to sleep. The first thing I did in the morning was text Jake about the knocking. This time, he replied quickly, saying he had no idea why someone would be wandering around that late at night. He said it was strange and advised us to contact the authorities if it happened again. It was not the most comforting answer, but I could not really blame him. What else could he say? Arm yourself and confront them? Still, it felt like a serious enough issue to bring up, and I could not just brush it off. The snow outside was thick, and the day was dark and gray, with squalls continuing to fall steadily. I went out to clear the snow off my Jeep, and that was when I noticed something unsettling: footprints in the snow circling around the house. They looked fresh, which confused me because it had been snowing all night. Surely, the snow would have covered any tracks from the previous evening. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see Matt walking up toward my car. He greeted me casually, and I told him about the issue with the water heater. He said he knew and that he was there to take a look. I also mentioned the knocking from the night before and pointed out the footprints in the snow. He glanced at them and shrugged, saying, "There are a lot of strange folks who wander around at night, but they are harmless." Feeling uneasy, I asked if we should avoid using the hot tub at night, but he assured me it was not a problem. Matt went inside and walked around the house for a bit before heading down to the basement. He said he was going to check on the water heater. Something about him seemed off, though. I could not quite put my finger on it, but he just gave me a strange vibe. As I stood in the kitchen, I texted Jake to let him know that Matt was there checking the water heater. Jake's reply made my stomach drop. He asked, "Who is Matt? Is that the name of the repairman?" "No," I replied. "Matt is your brother. He said he runs this Airbnb with you." Jake's next message sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean, my brother? I do not have a brother named Matt." It was like my brain clicked into survival mode. I asked him if anyone else was supposed to have access to the property, but Jake confirmed there was not. I rushed to Emily and told her to calmly pack her things. "We need to leave now." We packed up in record time, stuffing our bags and anything important into the car in one trip. I am sure we left behind a phone charger or something small, but I did not care. We just had to get out of there. As I started the Jeep, I checked the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. Matt was sprinting toward the car from the back of the house. Without hesitation, I threw the Jeep into drive and sped down the snowy road, not daring to look back. Once we were back on the road, I called Jake and explained everything that had happened. I told him he needed to call the police immediately. He kept the conversation brief, promising to take action. About 20 minutes later, while we were still driving, Jake called us back. He said the police had already arrived at the house but had not found anyone inside. Jake mentioned he was heading over there himself and was mostly calling to get more details from us about the man we had encountered. To settle our nerves, Emily and I decided to drive around the area for a while. Exploring helped us clear our minds, even if just a little, after everything that had unfolded. After a couple of hours, we finally decided to head home. Later that evening, Jake messaged me to update us and to apologize profusely. He said he had no idea who the man we described as Matt could have been. Jake insisted that no one fitting that description should have been anywhere near the property. The more I thought about it, the more it disturbed me. That man had been watching us the entire time. From the moment we arrived, through our time in the hot tub, and possibly even before we went to bed, he was there. He was almost certainly the one who banged on the door in the middle of the night. What haunted me most was the question of his intentions. What was he planning? Was he just trying to scare us, or was it something worse? I will never know, but one thing is clear, we were lucky to have left when we did.